Welcome to the Agile Book Club. Here are your hosts, Justina and Paul.
Hello. Is it me that... Am I making this noise or it's you? Okay.
Hello?
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me? Okay, now. Can you hear me, Paul? Hello?
Hello.
Okay, I think that my headphones were making weird noise, but I took them away. Yeah.
Okay, so are you recording on your Zoom device?
Yes. I already clicked record and yeah, everything is okay.
Okay.
I hope.
So hello.
Hello, Paul.
So this is the first time we've actually done a podcast when we weren't in the same room together. And I've got to say, I miss you, but the beaches in Portugal are pretty amazing.
Yes, I know. I saw pictures. You can't have everything. Yeah.
So how are you?
I'm doing good, but the weather in Krakow is, I think, similar than in Portugal, but worse because no water. So it's like disaster. Yesterday, when I was riding on my bicycle, I was feeling like someone is keeping hair dryer on, the highest level and just blow in my face. That's the feeling that we are getting right now in Krakow. So please enjoy your time in Portugal, because when you will be back, it might be still the same.
Ooh, no. It's lovely here. It's like 22 to 24 degrees and blue skies and a constant breeze. So it's never hot and it's never cold and it's so peaceful. Oh my goodness gracious. I could just stay here forever if it would only stay June forever.
Okay. Did you try to record podcast on the beach actually?
No, I did not try to record a podcast on the beach because the waves were too loud.
Okay.
Those damned waves. Somebody should do something about that.
Oh, yes.
You should be able to record a podcast on the beach. But no, against the rules, apparently.
Yeah. As I said, you can't have everything.
But you know what we can have, and it's something I'm really excited about today. We're going to be interviewing Dominica DeGrandis, the author of Making Work Visible.
Yes.
Which is awesome.
Yes.
You know, I met her a few years ago.
Really?
Not a few years ago. Okay, I'm almost 50, and so when I say a few years ago, I mean a decade
20.
ago. not quite so much, but I met her about a decade ago, and this is kind of exciting for me because this is the second time. We've only done 2 books so far, but I really appreciate the fact that we're talking to authors who actually have done the work, Mm-hmm. She's the real deal. She's hardcore. She's an engineer. And she's not just talking like a consultant. She's not just somebody who sells some particular prescription for a solution. She has done the work. She's been in the hole with us, and she knows the way out. So this is going to be exciting. And also, she is one of the inventors of Kanban. Back in the early days at Corbis, when Kanban was still in its infancy, she was on the original team that discovered everything that became what we now know as the Kanban method for software development. So I'm pretty excited about this.
Yeah, I share your excitement, but I also got a little bit stressed because you know me. I read book 2 or 3 times before our interview. I try to find everything that I can find on the internet regarding the people that we are going to talk to. And seeing, her experience and knowledge and everything got me into a little bit, stress. But I hope it will go smooth.
It'll go smoothly because like I told you, I met her once, but she's super nice. I mean, she's like the voice in the book. She's easygoing and casual and playful and nice, and you'll like her. So this is going to be a fabulous interview.
Yeah.
I'm going to enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy it too.
I will enjoy it, even though that I'm not in Portugal.
So wonderful. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We met many years ago. I want to say it was in Boston. I attended one of your talks on visualization techniques, and you were the one who first introduced me to the idea of a Kanban board that looked like an actual road, like a road in a board game. And I still use that illustration in my classes just to show people how creative they're allowed to be.
Yes. that's the one nice thing with a physical board is that there are zero constraints. Every digital tool has some kind of constraint, but physical board, no constraints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The way I often convince teams to use physical boards, because most places that we work, we have to use a digital board just because we're coordinating with people who are remote, that the digital board is the basic information that everyone needs to have, and your team's personal physical board or your company's physical board. The physical board is the place where you have all of your creative modifications that are just for you.
Just for you? Oh, just like for the individual?
Not for the individual, but there are things that you want to do, things that you want to show that maybe Jira won't let you show. Well, your physical board is the place in which whoever's using the board, the team, a group of teams, a company portfolio board, whatever it is, the physical board is the place where you get to go crazy and be creative and really have the information radiating that you want to be radiating. And the digital tool is just for sharing the basic information with the larger audience.
Yeah, and capturing the metrics too. I like what you said about showing what you want to be showing physically, because it's so powerful. For example, if you're focusing on a pain point at that point in time, like I was working with a company in LA, and one of their biggest pain points was work that required a purchase order. Oh my gosh, if a purchase order was required, it took forever. So they wanted to bring visibility to that. And so they created a board, and they had a horizontal swim lane for work that did not need a PO. And then above that, they had another horizontal swim lane for work that did need a PO. And then their vertical columns, they had inserted a column called waiting on PO, the purchase order. And they just sort of like rubber stamped the date that it went in there. And they placed this on a large wall in a major hallway on the finance floor where accounting people could see this. And there's just something about a physical board when you walk by it. The eye tries to understand visually the patterns and the colors, and we're trying to comprehend the meaning of this visual. And it was just so powerful, and it got the message it got the message across quickly in a way that a digital approach, I think, would have been harder.
Mm-hmm. So how did it actually work out for the accounting to have this visualization? Because I'm super curious. I know a lot of people that works in accounting, and they constantly complain that it's always slow and that it have to be slow.
Yeah. Well, I think there's I think accounting and the whole funding model right now is getting a lot of attention because of the traditional project-based funding models, where all work needs to get assigned to a project, and then the project has to get funding. And in many organizations, that's an annual budgeting process, which is so painful for organizations, because if you want something done in 2020, or if you want something done in 2019, that had to have been approved in your budgeting cycle in 2018. Yeah. And so the inflexibility with that budgeting and funding approach is coming under fire. And we're starting to see some change with organizations who need to move quickly to adapt. I mean, how can you say that you're doing Agile or DevOps or being lean if you've got to wait 12 months for approval or something, to get funding?
Which is why most projects are late before they're started.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's why we're starting to see project managed work starting to phase out and being replaced with work managed by products and value streams.
So going back to visualization, because that was a really nice segue into the book, which is what we're here and excited to talk to you about, because this is the Agile Book Club podcast. One of the things I really liked about this book, it was the second book in a row that we've reviewed that was basically a book about Kanban that hardly used the word Kanban in it, certainly not in the title.
Yeah.
Tricky.
Yeah.
What I really liked about it was the idea that there can be so much benefit from making work visible, and you're not trying to sell Kanban to somebody who wants to learn Kanban. It's not like a Kanban versus Scrum question. We chose Kanban, so we bought this book. It addresses Kanban from the point of view of its benefits, and it's a kind of benefit that everyone can recognize. People want to not be so overburdened, and they want more clarity about their work. Managers want to feel like things are being done efficiently, and they want to have clear and transparent reporting and understanding of what's going on in their systems. And you do this so elegantly through the idea of these 5 time thieves, which everyone knows when you introduce them, but you call them out very nicely. Could you take a moment and introduce us to the 5 time thieves?
You bet. So there are 5 thieves of time that rob us of our day. We get so overwhelmed, and there, before you know it, our day is gone and we haven't gotten done what we wanted to get done. The first thief of time is unplanned work. Unplanned work is the foundation of interruptions. These are I can't get the build to compile. I can't log into the server or whatever. You got a minute, these interruptions that plague our day. The second time thief is conflicting priorities. This is when people will ask, well, are we supposed to be working on project A or project B right now? And when the answer comes back as both, we know that conflicting priorities is trolling us, which is very common, because Team A's top priority is often not Team B's top priority, right? People aren't available when you need them. And then we have thief unknown dependencies. I call this the big bully thief, because it's so pervasive across organizations. The larger the organization, the more complex it is, the more specialists we have. The more specialists we have, the more dependencies we have, particularly in large enterprises where you've got thousands of engineers building hundreds of different products using dozens of different tools. And then there is thief neglected work. So this thief, a lot of this work, it's important work, but it's always like taking second string or second fiddle. It just doesn't get the budget or the love or the attention that it deserves in order to be completed. A lot of this work is maintenance or keeping the lights on, or it might be security patches or just fixing technical debt, things that don't get approved because project managers and business people are so focused on just, approving revenue generation kind of work through the value stream. And then lastly, but not least, is the ringleader of all the other thieves. And that's thief too much work in progress. And I call him the ringleader because in one way or another, all the other thieves are related to having just too much work in progress. There's just so much demand on people today, and it just seems to be getting even more so that teams and people don't have the capacity or the capability to keep up with their demand. It's a rather fancy way of saying that a lot of people are drowning right now. They're just underwater, buried.
Which of those time thieves you think is the most dangerous for the organization?
Which time thief is the most? Well, they are all kind of related to one another, but I've posed this question to a lot of people, and the biggest answer I'll get back is thief too much work in progress. Although I do think that conflicting priorities plays a really big role here, because if we're unclear on what the priority is, we tend to say yes more to taking work on. Like if I'm not sure if I should be submitting a talk to, this conference or that conference, I'll submit talks to multiple conferences. And because I did that, now I don't have time to finish this request that the marketing team wanted me to do today, that they were expecting. So I do think that not having clear priorities, that conflicting priorities I think it's right up there.
I wanted to make a comment earlier when you were talking about how people are just drowning in work. One of the things that you observed several times in this book, which really appeals to me, and it's something that I try to convince people of or to show people when I'm coaching them, and it's so hard to do, but you put it very elegantly when you said work is neglected when people are busy. Could you explain to our listeners why that is?
Work is neglected when people are busy. Well, people tend to be allocated or do it to themselves, allocate themselves at 100% capacity utilization. So the people are busy, but if we're also busy, that means that some of the work is sitting still, not moving. Because if we've got lots of balls going in the air, we really can only do one thing at a time. Well, I can talk and walk at the same time, but, human brains, we can't do too complex. If we're deep into something, designing or coding or, writing, we're not also at the same time learning Kubernetes or something. And so a decision to do one thing delays something else. And so that's why there's always going to be something that's neglected because we're focused on something else, because we're so darn busy.
But people like being busy. In my experience, people would rather be busy than to be seen by their boss to not be busy. How do you address that?
Yeah. And also, we like to be busy even if the boss isn't looking. Especially if the boss is looking, but I think we're getting so used to such a fast-paced life that even just sitting still, I think it's why people struggle with meditation. They just have a hard time sitting still. Just being still and thinking is uncomfortable for some people. However, if the boss is observing us not looking busy, and there's a reaction to that, or people get belittled because they don't appear to be busy. That's why I say watch the work, not the people, because it doesn't really matter how busy people are. It matters like when the work is getting done. And you can't tell that with knowledge work because a lot of it's invisible.
I was actually laughing a little bit when you said that people are not able to to sit still, because actually I'm one of those person, Mm-hmm. So I clearly understand that it's not easy, but I'm on my path to learn. But I had a little bit different question, because when I read your book, I got so many ideas on how to visualize. Then I went to YouTube and I watched, I think, most of your videos, and I got even more ideas how to do it. Yes, what to choose, take types of work, then priorities, maybe show dependencies, then put also the size of the task that we are going to work on. And all of these things got me into thinking where to start when you have the team that has zero knowledge about the visualization, and you have this huge basket of things that you can just take and try to visualize, but have no idea where to start.
Mm-hmm. So is your question, where should people start?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we want this to be to help them, right? The people who are involved with the team. So we want them to partake in the design and help decide where to start. And usually I'll do that with, in part 2, I have exercises in the book, and there's one called the demand analysis. Mm-hmm. And this is where we ask teams, what prevents you from getting your work done? Which is a very powerful question, because this is where the pain points are. And once they define what those are, then that's a great place to start, because then they can see that there's some action that's being taken to relieve this pain. In addition to that, we ask them, what do your customers complain about? So these are usually internal customers, not external customers, or you could do it with external customers. But the intent was people who ask you to do things, who are upstream from you, or people who you hand your work off to, who are downstream from you. What are they grumbling about? Because in order to set up a new way of working, you need to have buy-in from the people who are asking you to do things and the people that you're asking to do things. And if you can help solve some of their pain points too, it'll be much easier to get what you need from them done, which is usually approval on, limiting work in progress. And the biggest pain points that I hear teams talk about is that things take too long. They don't know where it's at. Like, where's my thing? I made this request 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard a peep from you since. Right. So those are some of the biggest things. And so if, for example, things take too long is the biggest complaint from your upstream customer, then bringing visibility to that of how long things take. And then you define, when to start the clock and when to stop the clock. Is going to be real useful for that team.
And do you have any advice? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say the other example I gave about the purchase orders, like that was a huge pain point for a team. If it has a purchase order, we're just not going to do it because it takes forever. But so for them to create their design and add that column for needs a PO, there's another example of, even if you're, after you've started and you're always sort of adjusting things. What's our, once you resolve a bottleneck somewhere, then it's going to pop up somewhere else. And so it's really, start bringing visibility to wherever that bottleneck is in your context, in your workflow.
Okay. Do you have any advice on how to train people and show them the value of the work visualization when they're actually so busy, when their utilization is, on the 100%, and then we somehow ask them to give us their time to learn a little bit more about the visualization, how to coach them, how to train them, how to show them the value?
Oh, that's a tough one, because when they go to training, it takes away from what they're supposed to be doing. And so sometimes in workshops, people, in the beginning, they'll be disengaged and they'll be on their laptop working. And so I frequently ask, who in the room here is like a prisoner, like who doesn't want to be there, but their boss made. And sometimes people are really honest, like, I'm a prisoner here, like, I really don't want to be here. And then okay, so who's just here to sort of pick up a few tips, and then who's all in. And so from the get-go, I sort of ask what situation you're in, and I sort of want to respect that. But usually when we do this demand analysis exercise and they have the opportunity to write out and explain and describe to people their pain points, then we get some engagement on, because there's hope then that maybe, we're going to design a system that's going to make this pain visible, which is going to provoke necessary conversations for change, and that they will be the ones, sort of instrumenting their experiments for change. And so that I have found that to be pretty useful for a lot of people, but there's it always seems like there's a couple folks that, and they just may not be ready for it. They just may not be ready for it.
So what do you do with those prisoners if they raise their hands and say that, yes, I'm a prisoner here. I have 100 requests waiting for me and I have to be here.
Yeah, then it's their choice, because we can't teach somebody something that they're not ready to learn. Maybe they'll be back, in 6 months or something. Maybe if people are under that much stress and pressure, it's not sustainable. So eventually, the capable ones who are successful and open to learning and ready to move on, they do move on. If they're not empowered to have some time for learning or training. We want to always be learning organizations. And so, a lot of what we're starting to see now is dojos pop up at organizations, especially ones doing DevOps, and bringing teams in for 3 to 6 weeks at a time for new learning, for new training, so that people can adapt to new ways of working and improve the way they're working. If you're stuck and mired in organizations that don't empower people to have time to learn new things and do training, then those organizations are losing good people.
I wanted to talk a bit about work in progress. You talk a lot about this in the book. It's one of the cornerstone solutions to so many of the issues that are caused by the time thieves. How do you go about limiting work in progress? How do you figure out how much to limit? Where do you limit? How do you convince people that it's a good idea?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think my answer to that, or my approach, is probably very different than most coaches. What I tend to do is I just say, get all your work up on this board. Let's see what you have. And then we all stand back and we look at it and we say, does this make sense? Say you've got 300 things up on your board for a team of 12 people or something ridiculous like that. Does this make sense? And people will say, no, it's like, we're drowning. It's way too much. Like, what should it be? Actually, I did this with a team. It was 100 things. Does 100 make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. What should it be? It doesn't really matter. 95 is better than 100. So continuously drop it. So it'd be like, you finish 5 things, don't take 5 more things in, right? Drop your limit. It's like when maybe companies will have to let go of some people, but they'll let them go through natural attrition and they just won't hire new people. And that's how they'll get their head count down. Same thing with WIP. Just let the attrition of the things finish, but don't bring anything new in. Just continuously drop the number of the amount of work in progress on your board down to a number where you start to see flow. If work is not flowing, then the WIP is too high.
From the point of view of a team, what does flow look like?
Flow is the smooth, fast, predictable movement of work items through a value stream. So flow is, flow is the first way of DevOps. And when we say that, what we're talking about is, in order to deliver customer value quickly, we need work to be flowing, quickly and smoothly, and predictably. And so if work is just sitting in your board and not moving at all, it becomes stale. It's sitting idle. That's stuck work. That's thief neglected work right there. And that's a signal that something's, you've got some dependency or there's a problem there. I mean, that's when you want to pull the and-on cord to say, hey, we need some help unstucking this thing that's stuck.
That's a great observation, because so often the reason why there's so much work is because it's all important. And it's all important because it's tied to somebody who requested it. And when somebody requests that a team do something, what they want, what they appear to want, is to have something done right away. And the easy answer to that is, well, we started that. It started, don't worry, we're working on it. But nobody actually wants to say, what I mean when I say we're working on it is that we are presently in the process of neglecting it.
Yes. Yes.
We're actively neglecting that, as well as most other things. They're being actively, aggressively neglected.
You can see it on our board too.
So I like that a lot.
So what do you say to people who resist the idea of limiting work in progress?
Well, I talk about the benefits of limiting work in progress. Work in progress is a leading indicator. And we don't get very many leading indicators in our line of work. I mean, if you're looking at cycle time or throughput or whatever, lead time, those are all trailing indicators, because you don't know how long it took to do something until it's done. The single most important factor of how long something is going to take to do is capacity utilization. It's how loaded people are. And I'm talking about flow load here, the amount of work in progress that they have. And the example I like to use is you get on the freeway, you get on the highway to drive home or somewhere. If that freeway is utilized at 100%, it doesn't matter if you're in a Ferrari, you're still not going to get home any faster, because the freeways move, they don't go fast when they're utilized at their full maximum. In order to have flow on the highway, you need to have space between the vehicles. And that's why we see, so I live in Seattle, and in Seattle we have, during rush hour traffic, we have traffic lights at entrances, at on-ramps to the highway. And you have to wait at the red light until there's enough space between the car ahead of you that went. And so this allows for smooth merging of vehicles onto the highway, and other cars don't have to stop and slam on their brakes because a car just cut in front of them. So did that answer your question?
Yes.
So now, obviously, you can't have all the work flowing absolutely smoothly across the board. There's one of the reasons why work might be neglected, which seems to be very legitimate from the point of view of a team, is that they have dependencies, all sorts of dependencies, dependencies on specialists, dependencies on other teams. You outline a number of approaches to identifying and dealing with dependencies. Could you tell us, when you're in an organization working with a team and they have a lot of explanations for why their WIP limit should be higher because it has to accommodate stuff that's just waiting on things that are beyond their control, what do you do with them to help call these things out and to find solutions for them?
Well, my practices around that have evolved a bit since I wrote that chapter in the book. It is still, because one of the things is that very few people use dependency matrices. They might for their code or their architecture for it, but they don't really between teams. And I do have a section in the book where I talk about managing by product over project, which I think is relevant to your question, because if teams can treat their value stream like a product instead of ignoring it, that's immensely useful. If we're managing work in projects, then there tends to be a lot more dependencies. You're trying to wrap this project up. You've got to go start another project. So now you've got to pull people off of this one project. They go work on another project. They were experts. They were subject matter experts. Now they're not available, but maybe you still need something from them. but now you got to wait on them. There's a dependency for that. Or the other big dependencies lie in shared services teams. So if you've got a DNS issue, you've got to wait for somebody from the network team to come help you resolve it. But the people on the network team aren't available because they're dealing with some firewall issue in production. And so instead of bringing the people to the work, we want to bring the work to the people and organize around a value stream where we keep the subject matter experts in their specialty, in their domain for that product we're trying to reduce, there's all kinds of ways to organize, but if you can reduce some dependencies by organizing and aligning teams with the product they work on or the value stream that they work on, that's going to help reduce dependencies.
I can see how even if these people didn't sit together, even if the network administrators were still sitting with the other network administrators and the subject matter experts were still sitting someplace else, if they're thinking in terms of a smooth flow of the value stream for a product, then it eases collaboration between people.
Yeah,
they all have the same priorities.
Yeah, they have exactly. Their priorities are aligned to get, whatever it is with that product. Their priorities are aligned. If you're on different projects, now you gotta escalate things up above to the PMO or some portfolio manager or something. What's the highest priority, A or B? Because it's going to be different across different project teams. If you're aligned by the product and you have to do some, fix some technical debt, you can have conversations about maybe holding off on this new feature request so we can fix this technical debt, and people will have an understanding. You can talk about those kinds of strategies for the different kinds of work.
Okay, I will move a little bit farther because I am kind of a curious person. And when I was reading your book and then when I watched your talks on YouTube, I was asking myself, how would you solve all the problems that you faced when you were working at Corbis with the knowledge and experience that you have right now? So if now you would have a chance to come back in time and work there again, what would you do differently?
Oh my, so much. So much.
Yeah. Top three.
Top three. I never would have taken on that additional role of SAP engineer. I just thought, I'll learn something new, and that was a mistake. So I would have been a lot more open to getting feedback from my upstream and downstream customers. For example, when developers were complaining that things took too long and how they wanted control of their own environment, I would have reached outside of Corbis. I would have tried to find community or find people. I would have reached out to people in other companies to see how they were solving the problem. That was probably one of my biggest failures, was just sort of staying inside the company. I don't think though that we had as much community or different user groups or communities of practice back then like we do now. But I feel like if I would have done that, I would have learned a lot more about how organizations were building out environments faster and quicker. And I would have heeded instead of taking it personally, builds take too long, you're too slow. Instead of taking that personally, I would have maybe asked more for their help. Like, how can I help you solve your problems faster? The problem was they would do builds, and then we would build it and compile it, and then the build team would deploy to the dev environment. And the developers wanted to be in control of the dev environment, which makes sense. The problem was that my team was accountable for keeping that environment up and running. If it wasn't if it didn't have the right data or if it didn't have the right config settings, then it was me who got paged at 2 a.m. in the morning. So hence I wanted to have control of that environment so that I could troubleshoot it easier and I knew what was wrong with it. If I handed it over to the development team who is making all kinds of changes from all different branches and code that may or may not have been checked into source control, you can see why I was resistant to that. But what I ended up doing was just saying, okay, you build it, you own it. If something's not running at 2 a.m., then you handle it. And I should have just let it go. So that's one big thing that I would have done differently is I would have been more open to feedback from colleagues. I would have reached out to my people who were in my role in other companies to learn what they were doing. I probably would have I was going to say I was reading a lot of business books back then, but I would have tried to find ways to learn about the latest technologies and optimizations that other organizations were doing that we didn't know about yet back in 2004, 2005. Yeah. What would the third thing be?
Those two are good enough.
Are they good enough? Okay.
Yeah, I'm satisfied. Yeah.
Okay.
There are
My
a lot more.
curiosity is satisfied, so that's okay.
There are a lot more support groups out there right now, but a lot of people don't have easy access to them because they don't live in major cities, for example, and also because when you're feeling like you're drowning and you're working late nights and coffee-fueled weekends, going to meetups doesn't really feel like an option. So I think it's fabulous advice when you're drowning to reach out to peers. Even if you can't make it to a Friday evening meetup, just call somebody who does the same sort of job, because you can't dig yourself out of a hole by doing the same thing you've always done.
Yeah. And now it's so much, I think it is so much easier now because you've got Twitter and Facebook groups. And even if you can't go to a meetup in person, I've made so many friends just on Twitter and I became good friends with them. And I didn't meet them till, a couple of years later. But there's so much learning now and all the YouTube videos that are out, all the, all the DevOps Enterprise Summit videos are just out there free for the last 5-6 years on YouTube. It's fabulous.
So this has been terrific. I want to ask you, is there anything else that you'd like to share about the book or about your experience while we're talking?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of key takeaways I'd like for readers to get out of my book. And the first one is just to ruthlessly protect your time and learn how to say no. I mean, saying no doesn't make you an arse. Sometimes it's just the right thing to do. But saying no, it's uncomfortable. It's a learned skill and it just takes a bit of practice. And one way to do that is there's a part in the book where I call interruption busters. Ways to prevent yourself from being interrupted and distracted through the use of what I call do not disturb hours on your calendar. It doesn't really matter what your WIP limit is. If your calendar is chock full back to back all day long, like you got the all day cram going on in your calendar and you have zero time to do your most important work during the day, when do you do it? You do it at 10 o'clock at night after you put the kids to bed, or you do it on Sunday afternoon. It's like Sunday's the new Monday now. And so it is just essential to protect your time ruthlessly and learn to say no to things that are not, no is an honorable response to somebody who is asking you to do something that is not in line with your goals. And then I think just whatever you can do to help people visualize their pain points so that it will provoke these necessary conversations to help you do something about it. And then I just want to bring up flow metrics. There's a flow metric called flow distribution It's not in my book, but it should be, where how you categorize your work. And I think there's 4 categories that of work that are really key for people to, whatever work you put on your board, put it into one of these categories. And one would be like features. This would be revenue generation kind of work. And then one for technical debt or internal team improvements. So that teams, if you can allocate one of those every so often, it's a huge morale booster. And then have a work item type for some kind of risks like security breaches or compliance. And then another one for defects. I mean, categorize your work in those categories, then you can start to measure them. And you can tag unplanned work on that too. So you can start to see how much unplanned work is in your system. Because if you're not finishing your planned work because you've got all this unplanned work, then it's like the perfect crime because there's no evidence of all this unplanned work that you're doing. So I do talk about flow metrics in the book, flow time and flow efficiency. And I just wanted to add flow distribution onto that is, I think, really critical for people to measure.
I like that, especially since those last 3 categories of types of work, if they're not budgeted for in your time, and if they're not budgeted in your WIP, then they tend to present themselves eventually as crises.
Exactly.
So that's terrific advice.
One more thing that I really got from your book and that changed my current workflow is that I'm trying to kill my zombie projects. I wish it would be like a bigger chapter to know, how to do it even faster and how to understand faster that this is like a zombie project and you have to kill it and release your resources. But I really, really would like to say a personal thank you for mentioning that because it's really an eye-opener. At least it was for me.
Yeah, the zombie projects. Yeah, it's that sunk cost bias that we tend to hang on to things because we've got so much invested in it instead of recognizing how much more work it would be to finish it versus finishing something else.
Just out of curiosity, how many of those zombie projects came from my ideas that you're squashing?
Yeah. Paul, it's not the coincidence that in last month when we were preparing for the podcast, I was saying no more often than usually.
I have noticed, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dominica. Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking this time to spend with us. It's been delightful talking to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to talk with you while I'm here in London.
Fabulous. Enjoy your time in Europe, and thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. And I hope that I will be as lucky as Paul and also meet you one day.
Me too.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So I hope you've enjoyed this fabulous conversation we just had with Dominica DeGrandis. If you find the work that we're doing here valuable, then I've always said, and you've heard me say this before, it's only 4 episodes in, but you've heard me say this before, the most sincere form of thanks is cash. And it costs us a fair amount of money to make this podcast. We've got hosting costs, we've got all the various tools that we use, we've got editing costs.
Paul flying to Portugal.
So I'm not counting that.
Sorry.
Me flying to Portugal doesn't count as a podcast cost.
I know.
But we're spending like $150 a month or so on making this podcast happen. So if you find this useful, then we'd really appreciate it if you'd help us out. We've got the Patreon. You can click on the Patreon link in your podcast tool, whatever it is that you use for listening to podcasts. It has a link to our Patreon. And we'd really appreciate it if you would help us to pay for this, because hopefully we'll get to the point at which we're providing valuable enough content that you are happy to help us cover the costs of making it for you. Interviews like this one with Dominica DeGrandis, and of course the reviews of all of the fabulous books to come. So what can they look forward to next? Justina, what can our listeners look forward to next in our podcast? Coming up in 2 weeks.
Wait. You mean the podcast with Mark's book, or no?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Like 2 weeks after this, this podcast will come out on the 15th of July, and on the 1st of August, there's going to be a podcast about Mark's book. So what can people look forward to in the next podcast if they subscribe now in their favorite podcast listening tool?
That would be very awkward, Paul, because I don't remember the title of the book. I know that it's about retrospectives, and I ordered it on Amazon, and it's still not here. Yes.
Okay, so maybe we won't include that because I don't remember the title of the book either.
Yes, sorry, Mark. We like you. Oh, wait, I got it. Wait, here it comes. Oh no, I have to log into Amazon to see the whole title. It's Improving Agile and then something. Yeah.
I hear a dog.
No, it's not dog. Actually, a few minutes before you called me, there was someone started renovation above me. And I was like, no, will they stop? And then they stopped, and now I hear again. Okay, improving agile retrospectives, helping team become more efficient.
Okay, so what can our listeners look forward to? What can our listeners expect from our next episode in 2 weeks? So, Justina, in 2 weeks, we're going to be releasing a new episode. And it's going to be exciting. It's going to be as good as the ones we've done before, maybe better. And it's going to be about
improving agile retrospectives, how to help your team to become more efficient. And I'm very happy to interview Mark because I met him only 3 years ago, I think, on one of my first ACE conference. And I didn't have a chance to talk with him. But when I've seen his talk, it was so much fun. So I expect that the book will be fun too.
Yes, Mark is an old friend of ours from the early days of ACE. He's been one of the popular speakers at the ACE conference for several years. And so it's going to be really nice to get to talk to him again. And I'm really looking forward to reading and reviewing his book.
And especially that Mark was one of our first fresh faces at the conference. ACE was his first conference that he had a chance to speak in public.
That's right. And he wasn't planning on it.
Oh, really?
At the very first ACE conference, he wasn't one of the speakers. He did a lightning talk. So he found the environment so encouraging and welcoming that he thought he would get up on stage and use the lightning talk sessions to share a few ideas that he had. And he had so much fun doing it that he became a public speaker. And now he's a keynote speaker.
And writer.
So that's fabulous. It's something and a writer. And we're going to be talking about his first book in 2 weeks. So join us on the Agile Book Club podcasts to learn how to make your retrospectives better with the person who is an expert at it, who has been doing it for over a decade, Mark Loeffler.